Welcome to episode 17 of the Icario podcast. In this episode, we're talking about cults. In fact, we're talking about a very personal experience because, as it turns out, I used to be in a cult. Well, that's a bit oversimplified, but as you'll see as we get into the episode, for the sake of simplicity, let's just say, for the sake of drama, let's just say that I escaped the clutches of a cult, albeit a relatively harmless one. And in this episode, we talk about my experience seeing this from the inside. And the reason I wanted to make this the topic of today's episode is because as I am looking around, I'm seeing that my personal experience with seeing a cult from the inside seems to become more and more relevant. This experience taught me a lot about human nature, about human behavior, and about, the flaws in human behavior in many ways. And like I said, it seems to be becoming more and more relevant. We're seeing cult-like behavior and cult-like messaging become more and more popular, more and more common. The most prominent example of this recently would be QAnon, I think, which is a conspiracy theory cult of a kind. And similarly, there are many other online communities, and I think this is a result of social media bubbles, of information bubbles, where people can fall into these online bubbles of information that display a lot of cult qualities and cult behaviors. And so whether that is something like, angry young men falling into some kind of a red pill, incel, alt-right kind of thing, there's a lot of culty stuff going on there. And then, it's often politicized. So, on the other side, you can easily argue, well, on the other side, we have, ultra woke bubbles where people have to be punished and canceled out of existence for making the slightest mistake in a tweet 10 years ago, which is also, there's a lot of culty elements there. And in the discussion, in the general discussion, this is often talked about in terms of the political spectrum, which, sure, it can be useful, but I think it misses the greater point of, what the hell is going on here? Why is this happening? Why are we seeing more and more of this? And how can we recognize this and what can we do about it? So that's what we'll explore in this episode. I think if you listen to this, a lot of the irrational behavior that you see online, it won't seem necessarily less irrational, but it will make more sense. You'll understand why this happens, and you'll also understand how this can even happen to you and how to defend against it. You can find the show notes for this episode and also leave a comment or reply by going to icario.com/017 for episode 17. That's icario.com/017. And you can also click a link there to leave us a voice message. So with that, let's dive into this topic. Here's episode 17.
Welcome to the Icario podcast, once again, where we help you optimize your life, break free from the human zoo, and become a force to be reckoned with your host, once again, Ollie, and
I'm Shane.
And I'm gesticulating more than usual for those that are watching the video, because we're stood up now.
Oh,
you guys listening on Spotify or Apple or wherever, you can't see this, but we're actually stood up because we're being healthy boys.
You're missing out. You're missing out on the glorious image of us standing. What?
Yeah, it's just such an upgrade.
Listen, let's get to the thing.
What are we talking about today, Shane?
So today we're talking about what I learned about human nature from being in a cult.
You were in a cult?
Kind of, yeah, kind of. So, and this was really interesting. So let me explain. What happened is that when I was about 13, I joined a martial arts school that was teaching like kung fu, self-defense type stuff. And I stayed with that school for about 10 years. And over the course of 10 years, this turned from a normal self-defense martial arts type school into a pretty culty organization. And so I think it's extra interesting. So let me say, I don't regret this at all. I'm really glad that I've had this experience, especially because I didn't just join a cult. I joined a normal organization that turned into a cult, that slid into a cult.
So you could see You could see the transition.
Exactly. I could see it devolving over time. It's actually really fascinating. It's really fascinating. So I'm glad for this. And I think there are some interesting lessons about human nature from this. And also, as we mentioned on a previous episode, I think that understanding how cults work and how can this happen, how can a bunch of reasonable people end up believing unreasonable things and doing unreasonable things, I think that it's important to know this as a basic factor of like mental self-defense. It's like you've got to have some mental self-defense, right? Otherwise, people are just going to take advantage of you. And understanding how cults work and why they work is one of those things.
Cool.
So what I'd like to do is we're going to briefly talk about like the cult playbook, the how to create a cult playbook, the some basic rules for how to do this. And this is stuff you'll see over and over again in all kinds of cults. And then I'll talk about my experience about how this happened. And like I said, like the lessons I learned from this.
Cool. Because I've got some questions for you about how actually, how the cult formed and how you could, like, when you noticed this happen. But yeah, sure. Well, I guess I'll ask you then. If I wanted to create a cult right now, if I decided I wanted to create a cult and that was my goal, if there's a playbook, then what would I need to do?
So there's definitely things, there's like a playbook of the things that always happen. And, let's also consider there are all kinds of cults and cult-like organizations forming all the time. And, for example, QAnon is a ideology, I guess, that has a lot of cult-like aspects to it. And so sometimes it can happen like organically. Many religions, the way religions are practiced, often has cult-like aspects to it. So it's also, I think it's important to see there's like a spectrum here, all that goes all the way from, totally destructive suicide pact cult to just kind of, this is kind of harmless,
Got you.
But yeah, so let me just go through a couple of the aspects of like how to form a cult playbook. So one of the aspects is that you want to get people to make progressively greater sacrifices or commitments to the cult. And this is a really important aspect so an example of this is South Park famously at one point made an episode about Scientology where they basically said, look, what we're going to do is we are going to explain the kind of the inner circle secret of what Scientologists believe. And we're not going to exaggerate anything. We're basically not going to make fun of this. We're just going to show you what it is that they believe. And that's the joke. And they believe this weird thing where, some alien overlord banished a race of aliens and sent them, strapped them to volcanoes and nuked them or something, and the souls of those aliens are attached to humans, and they cause all our problems, and Scientology uses this technology to remove those souls, something like that, right?
That kind of stuff sounds like the writings of a science fiction writer, which strangely enough, interestingly enough, isn't it? L. Ron Hubbard, science fiction writer, for those that don't know.
Yeah.
Also the creator of Scientology.
Exactly.
His greatest sci-fi novel to date.
Its most successful one, arguably, yeah. So the thing is, right, it's ridiculous. When you see it, when you're just shown this whole story, that's ridiculous. And you go, well, why would anyone believe this? Well, see, the way it works is you aren't shown that whole story from the beginning. In the beginning, it's like, hey, we're this organization, it's about becoming a better person and being successful. We can help you. And, we do this therapy, and it's a special therapy. You have to hold these rods and we dial some, twist some dials and stuff. And then you go, oh yeah, I feel a bit better. And then it's like, oh, you can learn even more, join this tier or whatever. But then you have to pay some money, for example. Or you have to be like, you can get the higher level of insider knowledge and insider treatment and whatnot, but only if you have come to the church regularly for at least a year, So you have to make a commitment, right? And then you have escalating commitments like that. So by the time you get to the ridiculous story, or by the time the ridiculous story will be unveiled bit by bit, and by the time you see the full picture, you've probably been in the organization for years. You've spent loads of money with these people. You've done all this stuff that at this point, to say, hold on, this is nonsense, and to walk out is much harder than just to say, yeah, I guess that sounds good, you know?
Yeah. You've invested too much.
You've invested too much, yeah.
Yeah, you're not going to all of a sudden become critical of it in an instant.
Mm-hmm. So using the commitment bias, we've talked about commitment bias before, right? Probably my favorite bias.
So I love how you have a favorite bias.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, it's my all-time fave.
Yeah, it is though. It is. It's amazing. So, yeah, creating that commitment and basically tapping into commitment bias. That's a really central part of the playbook. And that includes some other steps, or there are other steps that are kind of related to this. And one of them would be to get people to, actually, let's do first, to create a strong us versus them frame. That is just always going to happen. You have to create a strong us versus them frame. So you have to create a very clear sense of this is us. And there's others which are outsiders, and also there's others, there's the enemy. There's always us, we're the good guys, and outsiders, they're just, in the case of a cult, usually outsiders are just lost, right? But then the others, the ones that oppose us, they're the enemy. And if the enemy wins, that's usually the end of the world in some way. It's usually framed in such a way. It's not just like we kind of disagree with them, It's not that we think the way they make pizza is wrong and the way we make pizza is tastier. No. It's like they are the enemy. And if we let them continue doing what they do, if we don't win this war, they will destroy everything that is good and holy. That is how it's framed. And so you can see this, and this is, unfortunately, this is also an element in populist politics, which unfortunately we've seen a rise of, where it becomes a case of not we are all citizens of the same nation and we have some disagreements about how to run things. No, it's like it's us versus them. Like half the country are crazy, evil people who are trying to destroy everything that is good in the world, and we have to defeat them. And the reason the reason this happens in politics is because this is the kind of the lazy way to gain political power. If you're sitting around talking about policy, who cares? And it's hard to get votes. But if you say, they are the enemy, we are the good guys, and I need your money and your votes, incidentally, in order to save you, right? So strong us versus them framing is an important part.
Right. So far we've got increase in level of investment. So if I wanted to create a cult, get a bunch of people, and I'd develop this sort of tier system. Mm-hmm. I'd also, like, with every level of the tier system, I'd make them privy to a bit more information, but then always be teasing but you've not seen nothing yet.
Yeah.
So I'd do that. I'd also develop an us versus them frame. I'd need an enemy
for sure
of some description, and the stakes would need to be so high that you this is the only option you have. You need to invest in this, or everything's screwed.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Cool.
That's a good start. Yeah.
That's a good start.
And also, talking about like getting people to make deeper and deeper investments, like if you're thinking something like Scientology or other cults, where usually one of the things is like people spend all their money, or they sacrifice all their money to this thing, and you think, why would you do that? Like, wouldn't the fact that you have to pay so much for another scrap of insider information, wouldn't that prevent you from doing it? No. That's a feature. That's not a bug. It's the fact that I have to keep paying more and more money that keeps me going. And this is even something that can be seen with like the whole fake guru thing. There's fake gurus who will, for example, they're like, day trading secrets or whatever. They say, I'm going to teach you the secrets of becoming a millionaire investor, or I'm going to teach you the secrets of whatever, online marketing or being a high ticket closer or whatever it is,
That was the one that got me.
Yeah.
High ticket closer. Yeah. See, everything you just mentioned is basically how he got people. Because for those that aren't aware, I got stung by one of these gurus that charges just thousands of pounds or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And he did basically the same thing. He had his inner circle. Well, actually, no. He had the academy,
Mm-hmm.
which he got put into, which is just a Facebook group. But then, like, you would charge an exorbitant fee to be in that academy for 9 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And then there'd be this inner circle. And then the whole time in this Facebook group, him and his other coach are like, we've been assessing you based on your eligibility for the inner circle. And we really think that, you have what it takes to be in the circle. And they're framing this shit like it's a privilege to be charged like 15 grand for this inner circle.
Yeah.
And then they're framing it in that way. I'm not sure about this, but I've made an exception. Maybe you are fit for it and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's crazy. And when you mentioned a little while ago about the investment, some of the people who I was in the academy with, I jump on calls with them and talk about it, and they'd be like, he's told me that I can join the inner circle, but it's like a 15 grand investment. I think I'm going to do it. And I'm like, wow, what? So for me, when it hit that point, because I'd not achieved anything, I was like, well, I'm out. This is ridiculous. There's a couple of people I spoke to who are like, yeah, I'm going to do it because I've come so far already. And I just feel like I'm right on the precipice of like this success that I'm wanting. And all the other people in the inner circle are really achieving what I want and stuff. And it's like, it reeked of denial. It reeked of denial and overinvestment and a bias, the investment bias thing. It reeked of that. And it seemed very culty to me.
Yeah, exactly. They're using the cult playbook essentially, whether consciously or not. They're using some of the moves, right, from the playbook essentially. Yeah. So that's one way to get people to make deeper investments. Another way is to get people to cut off contact with the outside world essentially. And this is a big one for cults. So, and this is why I talked about us versus them first. First, you have to establish there's us, there's them. Obviously, we're the good guys. You don't want to be them. But then there's the other thing, right? So maybe people around you are doubters, right? Maybe they're telling you, ooh, why are you in this cult? Why are you spending all your money here? Why are you spending all your time here? This is nonsense. They're doubters. And maybe they're even evil, right? They are trying to get you away from the light. Maybe they are seeing the potential in you and they're trying to keep you down. And you have to cut these people out of your life.
This is exactly, almost word for word, what he said to people.
Seriously?
Yeah. It's like there'd be occasional Facebook post in there. They're saying, hey, I've spoke to my family about this and they're dissuading me from it. They're saying I'm being, I've spent too much money on this and they're expressing concerns. And the overwhelming response from them would be, okay, these people, they don't see the world the same way as you do. They're stuck in scarcity mindset. They're stuck working jobs they don't like. And you're different. We're different here. Don't listen to them, even though their own family. Yeah. They're referring to this. It's like don't listen to your own family. It's like listen to us more than your own family, which is suggesting that we're your family now, kind of thing, which is really creepy.
Yeah, and this goes all the way to like literally cut off contact with everyone from your former life and come move to the compound with the guru. Which is how some of the cults kind of ended up, right? And and not only does that cut off contact from the people who are kind of like a moderating force in your life, where someone can say, dude, don't do that. That's stupid, right? It's like that's one of the functions that a social group has is they can basically keep you from doing something, from overreaching or doing something stupid. That can sometimes be good. And so it cuts you off from that, but also it's a further sacrifice. It's a further sacrifice where you can say, well, at this point, I've alienated my friends and family and left them behind and disowned them or whatever, and I've given all my money and I've moved to a different country. It's like now you're so deep in. No matter how ridiculous the story is now, you're going to believe it. Right?
Yes. Yeah, because you've invested just so much.
And then another factor, and there's more, right? There's more, but one more factor I want to touch on is just hierarchy. There's usually a very clear structure of hierarchy. like we've hinted at, right? There's like the inner circle and then the masters and the grand masters and whatever.
Then the figurehead.
Yeah, and there's usually a figurehead who is revered by everyone. And there's usually mythology about the figurehead, and they have all kinds of they make the blind see and the crippled walk and all this kind of stuff, right? And there's usually also a very strong aspect of you can't question people higher up in the hierarchy. If someone higher up in the hierarchy says something, you can't call bullshit on that because you just don't understand. You don't understand it. Like once you get to that level, you'll get it. And another thing that you mentioned, which I think also is worth highlighting, like this idea that you're always just about to turn the corner, and you keep people in that state. You're just almost, right? The carrot of, you dangle the carrot in front of people of everything you've ever dreamed of, the solution to all your problems. You're almost there. Just if you just go one step deeper, give me a little more money, commit a little harder, you'll get there.
Yeah, that was exactly the case. Yeah, it's just a little bit more money and you'll have all the clients in the world. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, maybe you're right. But it's just like, yeah. I got out of there before the inner circle. The 9-week thing.
That's good, yeah.
The 9-week thing came to a close, and I realised all I was now was just broke and miserable and frustrated. And then luckily, the rational part of me was like, look, if you want to know where this is going, then what's led you here has to factor into it somewhat. So it's like,
yeah, for sure.
So yeah, that helped.
But yeah, and it is important to understand, like, everybody can be vulnerable to this.
Mm-hmm.
This can happen to everyone. If you think like I'm a reasonable person, I have common sense, that doesn't mean that you can't be seduced into something like this.
Yeah, exactly. There's a great documentary called Wild Country, I think. And it talks about Osho.
Mm-hmm.
And spiritual teacher Osho, I think he was around in the 70s and 80s, developed a following and created a commune in this place in rural America. And in the documentary, there's loads of interesting interviews with people who, they were hierarchically quite close to Osho. And some of them were extremely intelligent people, like professors, scientists and stuff like that. And somehow they fell into this cult, and they don't know how. They don't know how that happened. It's like, whoa.
Yeah.
But fascinating documentary. I highly recommend you watch that.
Yeah, let's link that in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
All right. So now let's talk about my experience of like seeing an organization devolve into a cult.
Yes, let's do that. Now that I know where to get started with how to form my own cult, then I want to hear how things at your martial arts school devolved. Mm-hmm. So maybe start at the beginning. So obviously it started off as just a regular martial arts school. Nothing,
So
nothing weird about it.
I think so. I think that probably the seeds of a cult were already there, right? But for sure, the main thing that changed is that in the beginning it was about self-defense. Like you went there if you wanted to learn how to defend yourself from a potential attacker, and that's what they taught. And they also had some other stuff, like they had a bit of like Tai Chi and stuff like that, which was like, oh yeah, it's healthy and whatnot. But it was really mainly about self-defense. By the end of my 10-year stint there, it was mostly about the health stuff. They started neglecting the martial arts side of it quite a bit. They emphasized, we're a health organization and whatnot. And it was just, it went from like the hard practicality of, we're going to teach you self-defense. Especially the teacher I had at first was really like kind of a hard dude, was like, listen, I'm going to teach you how to defend yourself on the street, no bullshit, this kind of thing. And they went from that, and he left and somewhere at the midway point of this development. and they went from that to being like, oh yes, you have to align your chakras and energies and the incense sticks and holy water and God knows what, So that's a pretty drastic shift. I was going to
say quite a leap.
Yeah.
What happened there?
Yeah. So, and I think, so one of the things is, of course, this martial arts school had a founder who had started it all, and there were then several schools that were all, following his system and so on. So right there you have the figurehead already. And that itself is not necessarily a red flag. I mean, basically every organization has a founder, right? but it's still, it shows you that like that seed there. That can then, where it can slip into that, where he became like this revered guru by the end of it, you know? But it's also something, you know, maybe he was always a guru type. Maybe that was always going on. But in the first years, he just wasn't really a big factor. Like, if you were training there, yes, eventually someone would probably tell you, you know, this guy founded the thing, and maybe tell you his story or whatever. But it wasn't a big deal, you know? You could be in that organization and rarely ever encounter anything about him, really. And towards the end, he was just more important and more emphasized and more often mentioned and so on, you know?
Got ya. One of the questions I had from earlier was, at what point did you start noticing things going off the rails? Like what became apparent to you that things started, or was it so gradual that eventually you were just like, holy shit, well, what's gone off here?
Yeah.
Or were there some moments where you were like, hang on a minute, what's happening here? You know what I mean?
It was gradual, because what happened was that, so I have to say, I think I was lucky because, look, I was young. I don't think that I had great mental self-defense at the time. But what I already had was a really strong non-conforming streak. And I think that basically saved me from going along with them. Because what happened was that gradually I noticed things happen one by one that I kind of disagreed with. Or where I was like, okay, well, you do that, I don't care. But, you know, where I wasn't on board with this stuff. But the thing is, because it happens gradually, it was the same effect as we talked about before. Like, had I walked in on day one into the organization it was 10 years later, I would have immediately turned around and walked out and be like, these guys are crazy. Right? But because it was happening step by step gradually, that's the thing. There is never that point where you say, okay, now it's too much.
Right.
You know? It's more like at some point you look around and go, okay, hold on, what the fuck happened? You know?
Yeah. Whereas, yeah, so that must explain how perfectly rational people get pulled into these things.
Yeah. And that's one of the lessons also I learned. See, this is why perfectly rational, sensible people can end up in a cult, believing all kinds of nonsense, and also in some cases like perpetuating nonsense and doing tragic things. Like, how does that happen? Because the thing is, on average, every person there was a reasonable person. And one thing you have to realize is, like, look, humans are tribal animals. And our social ties are really important. So you have this organization where the guy at the top, like the Sifu of your school and whatnot, they're like bought in. They're generally really bought into the culty stuff. Most of the people training there aren't that bought in. But you keep going there because that's where your friends hang out, you know? You like the people there. And you like it's a hobby, you like the hobby. And it's quite difficult. Or think of it like this. It's quite a big leap to make and kind of a socially strange thing to do, to just say, look, I have some ideological differences with what the head guy is talking about. And so I'm going to walk away from all of this, you know? But like, we're friends, man. We're friends and we only meet here. And you're going to walk away from all this because he said something you disagree with? I mean, that's kind of weird, right? So it really is like the boiling the frog effect, where it's just like, well, just because he said or did one thing I disagree with, I'm not going to walk away from all my friends and abandon my hobby. And then later he says another thing I disagree with, or they make another change where I'm like, well, but again, I'm not going to walk away from all my friends because of this. And so on, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, for some reason, there's two things that sprung to mind with that. With regards to things being we're being really social tribal animals. On some level, this also can explain a part of why stopping drinking for an alcoholic is particularly difficult. Because if a person's drinking, unless they're just drinking at home in the dark alone, what's actually more common is that a person will have an ecosystem around their drinking, like a social climate that rewards that behavior. And if you stop drinking, you basically are saying goodbye to all of your friends too.
Yeah.
Which is another reason why it can be really difficult. Same with like being a stoner or something, you know? Like you have friends who you smoke weed with, but without that, there's very little common ground anymore. So it's like, well, I don't lose all my friends in addition to this thing that I smoke and I feel good. It's like, so no. So it's like the fact that we're social and tribal can reinforce certain things that if the social element wasn't attached to that, we'd look at it and be like, well, what the fuck?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you have a set of habits and a set of friends and stuff, and you can't just walk away from that from one moment to the next, or it's difficult to do. And that explains how you can have a bunch of basically reasonable people end up in like a cult.
Yeah.
And the other thing is also there's most people, if you kind of pulled them aside, one of the things was like here's an example, right? Here's an example of how things got strange. At one point, so there was, at one point in the school, they set up like this big water filtration tank, where the idea was you put water in and you could see like there was different layers of minerals or whatever that it would filter through, and then the water that comes out at the bottom is better for you. That was the first water related thing that happened. Now, as you can imagine, I was like, that sounds good to me, like I don't know anything about water, but if you tell me the water goes through these things, it gets filtered, it maybe gets mineralized, and that's good for me, that doesn't seem ridiculous, right?
That was the first water related thing, not just the only one.
That was the first water related incident, okay? But this shows you the boiling frog problem, right? Where, okay, so that happens and you go, okay, fine. And even there, if if the guru says you should drink this water, this is good for you. If everyone's standing in a group in the room and you ask, do you agree that this water is good for you? Everyone's going to be like, yeah, sure. If you pull someone to the side, individual, and ask, dude, do you think this is good? They'll probably be like, yeah. Some of them might be like, nah, probably it doesn't do anything. But publicly, you don't want to rock the boat, right? So you're not going to say that. Even if you're like, I'm not sure if this is useful. And also, it does no harm, right? It does no harm. So fine, we have a water filter thing. The next level of water-related thing was some guy, I don't know how this happened, but some guy came in at one point and gave this presentation about how some, reverse blah, blah, polarization of the water created triangular something, and that's super good for you. So this was a differently treated water that you could now buy relatively expensively. And it was supposed to be better for you, right? And suddenly everyone's saying, this is the water you have to drink. And again, you're like, so at this point, I'm like, I don't know if that's true. But I also don't know that it's not true. And again, it's water, who cares, right? Again, a room full of people would all say, yeah, sure, thumbs up on that. Pull them aside, probably a lot of them would be like, I don't know about this, man. But again, look, I don't care. I'm here with my friends. I'm doing my hobby. They're selling strange water. I don't care. Right?
Yeah, and in front of a room full of people, it's hard to be that one person when called out that just goes, this is, to be honest, I think this is bullshit.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, yeah. The third level of water...
This is ludicrous. It's almost like I'm forgetting you're even talking about a martial arts school right now.
Exactly, right? This is a martial arts school. It's a good reminder. So the third water-related incident that I'm aware of, this happened after I left, but one of my friends was still training there, and he told me about this. At one point, they had a machine that made holy water.
Okay.
So at this point, they're pouring tap water in one side of some machine, and they're saying that what comes out the other side is holy water, and they're selling that expensively, and that's what you should be drinking.
They unironically used the phrase holy water.
Yes. Okay. So, and at this point... But see the problem? At this point, you've already gone along with two levels of silliness.
I see multiple problems, Shane.
Anyway, so at this point, you've already gone along with two levels of silliness. And for example, my friend who was still training there, he was like, of course, in private, he was like, this is ridiculous. But he was still training there. He wanted to finish his, get his highest ranked whatever before he got out. And then, of course, and the same thing happened. So this is kind of the devolution, right? Or the de-evolution, I think I should say, of the water-based New Age beliefs. And similarly, on all other levels, the same thing essentially happened. They just went deeper and deeper into silly New Age stuff. And so this is how you end up. So there is a slippery slope there, right? There is a slippery slope where, like, gradually, you've already said yes to this crazy water thing. That opens you up to also saying yes to, oh, this incense thing, you wave it around in a counterclockwise thing in your room and it scares away the bad spirits or something. And gradually it gets crazier and crazier. And again, the organization doesn't fall apart because not everybody has to be agreeing with this. It's like, for me, I didn't go along with most of the New Agey stuff. I was interested in like Tai Chi and this kind of stuff. And I was interested in some of it, but I would say that most of it, I'm going to say at least 50% of the stuff that they presented on the health front, for me was just like, no, this is nonsense, even at the time. But again, I didn't immediately quit the organization because of this. And so you can have a lot of reasonable people who collectively all agree like most of this is nonsense, but they're all contributing to and being in an organization that peddles increasingly bizarre New Age stuff.
This is reminding me of my first year as a personal trainer. The organization I was with was Your Personal Training, and they budded up with Herbalife.
Oh God!
With Herbalife, which clearly multi-level marketing scheme, and the guys who were the personal trainer managers were all talking about Herbalife, even though the industry, personal trainers, had been, any personal trainer with a sense of integrity was taking the piss out of Herbalife for ages.
Right.
Saying it was exploiting people who just were nutritionally ignorant of certain things, like basic shit, and just couldn't apply it. People were looking for a magic bullet, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But these guys were all just like, right, guys, like we went to a seminar, for fuck's sake, where they were talking about how Herbalife gets people results. Look at all these testimonials. Look, this is before and afters.
Yeah.
And not only that, it can make you loads of money. And obviously, loads of new personal trainers, like 19 years old, just like, oh my God, this is amazing. Not an ounce, not a shred of mental self-defense to rub together between any of them. It's like, it's the same sort of deal. And there was a hierarchy. So you had your PT managers, and you had your Herbalife sort of people who were sort of above them. And then you had your area managers, and it kept on going up. And then basically everyone was making more money the higher you went up the levels. And it was just, I've never made this connection before, but yeah, from everything you've just been talking about, it's the same. It was the same sort of deal, although without the new agey water bullshit. But there was the kind of this formula in this canister improves your complexion and all this stuff. And it's like there's no research backing this shit up.
Yeah.
But
so yeah, you can see, and it's interesting, right? Like once you know about this stuff, you can see the aspects of cultiness. You can see them everywhere. So it is interesting. So another point I want to get to, and I think this is really important because this is something you can see in other people, but it's also something to guard against in yourself. I think this is one of my biggest lessons that I took away from this, is that one of the reasons people believe in weird conspiracy stuff is that it's kind of a shortcut to make them feel smart and make them feel superior. And that's in general true for a conspiracy theory. It gives you the feeling that you have special insight or knowledge that most people don't have. That makes you smarter than them, and that feels good.
Yeah.
And this is something that's really important, like, because when it comes to health, generally the authorities on health are highly trained professionals and researchers. It's like medical doctors, medical researchers, this kind of, it's an elite. It's an elite. Very few people go through all the kind of work and learning needed to be able to get into a position of being an expert on the topic of health. And in this organization, you had people, and I could really see this in the higher ups, right, in the CFUs and whatnot. The kind of pride they took in feeling superior to doctors, because, and this is also an us versus them thing, right? Where one of the ideas is that, like, you know, mainstream medicine is bullshit. You know, they only treat the symptoms but not the root cause. They don't get it. The reason you're sick is because of mainstream, this kind of thing, right? And think about it. You know, you can be someone who all you did was you maybe you read one new agey book, or maybe you listened to, you know, you watched some YouTube videos on some new age conspiracy health theory. And now in this martial arts school, you're standing in front of a group of students who are all listening to you, and you're going, haha, you know, the medical establishment, they're all wrong. And here's the truth. And I'm going to tell you the truth about what really matters and how you really can heal. And suddenly you have elevated your position. Like, in an afternoon of research, you have gained the knowledge, and I'm making massive air quotes here. They gained the lots of air quotes knowledge to be a greater expert and a greater authority than someone who spent like a decade studying to become a medical doctor, right?
Yeah.
And that is like, that's not available in any other way, basically. It's like this shortcut to authority, this shortcut to expertise, with very little effort. You can like leapfrog to the very top of world experts to listen to.
That just, to me, that just speaks to this desire for status we have.
Yeah.
For status within a given hierarchy. It reminds me of this black belt Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy who went around different Brazilian jiu-jitsu schools in the US to challenge black belts who claimed to be black belts. Because sometimes he'd run into a black belt and he'd get twisted up and it'd be like, okay, this guy's amazing. But a shocking number of times, he'd get like, okay, you're a black belt, okay, let's have a grapple. And they'd be terrible. And he'd basically call him out on it and put the name online and stuff. And it was all on YouTube. And it's like, what would cause a person to want to... It's the same deal. It's like, yeah. I'm going to buy this black belt in secret. And I'm going to tell everyone, just students, that are trained under this guy and know what I'm talking about and stuff. So I've got a bunch of people looking at me and I can feel in some way superior, but without putting the work in. There's something really appealing about that.
Yeah, it's seductive. I mean, I can understand that, basically, you know. It's, yeah, you wanted the belt without having to build the skill, you know. And yeah, like, look, I'm happy to say that I think I've never been interested in that kind of thing, or I'm somehow beyond that point. But I think this is an example of moral luck, you know, like, what did I do to be so noble as to not want to cheat my way to this kind of admiration or something? I didn't do anything. Like, this is just my default setting for some reason, you know. I can't take credit for that. And that's what I mean when I say, like, I understand this, you know. I can see what's seductive about this, and I'm grateful that I don't have that. I'm grateful that I don't have. That's all I can say. But it's also something that I try to. It's also something I try to manage in my own life, like in myself. I try to make sure that I don't do things that like puff me up or make me look better than I am. And I try to proactively, like, if I see that someone got an impression of me that I think is wrong, skewing on the positive side. So if someone got, you know, if I feel like someone is revering me too much, for example, I try to correct that. I don't want to be like, oh yeah, but it's a freebie, you know. It's like I didn't deceive them and it feels kind of good, you know. No, I want to correct for that. I want to counter steer that, because I don't want to slip into that. Like, I've seen people slip into that. These guys didn't start out like this, you know, and they didn't plot. They didn't plot and plan, oh, I'm going to be the big guru and I'm going to do all this nonsense in order to get people to admire me. No, they slipped into that. And I think, again, that's one of the reasons I'm grateful for having had this experience of seeing this from the inside, because it showed me things that I want to avoid, like on the side of an audience, right? On the side of being the student in the crowd looking up at the guru. But it also showed me things that I want to avoid in the position of guru. And, as a content creator, as a teacher, that's the position I find myself in. And so I'm grateful for that, because it's given me like this awareness of this slippery slope where you can end up, just like you can end up being the sucker in a cult, you can like end up being the guru in a cult,
Yeah, and this is something that as a coach I'm quite mindful of myself, because occasionally you get people who just ask you for your opinion on stuff, like, and eventually that can devolve into someone asking you how they should live and stuff like that. But if a person is sort of disempowered in that way and they're constantly seeking your opinion, they eventually like seek your approval.
Yeah.
It's like, what's your opinion on this? Okay, well, if I give you my opinion on that, this is what I think you should do. They'll go away and do it. Did I do well? Mm-hmm. Okay, what's the next thing I should do? And it's like, look, this is no longer a coaching relationship. I don't know what the fuck this is. I don't know what this is becoming. Mm-hmm. But it's not helpful for you as an individual, because ideally it's like, I don't want to be responsible for anyone feeling like disempowered, or feeling, basically I don't want to create any more sheep than are already, I don't want to feed into that impulse in people than it already is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's good to be aware, or you have to be aware of it. You have to be aware of it, otherwise you can't prevent it.
There's something I wanted to mention. So I like how you said it's a slippery slope. Mm-hmm. Because, for example, on the Icario team, there's like some ideas that are central to sort of you and the way you are and the way you live and what you teach and stuff, that on the team we've been internalizing. And it's like, so this is not a cult situation. Happy to know. Yet. I mean, we're on the way. I'm at this. Shane said it. Shane said before the podcast, if I do well at this podcast, I'll be possibly at the next level.
We'll be in a higher level than the other guys in the team.
Oh man, shit. I hope I've done all right. But it's like, so this is not a cult situation, but it's something that's providing value to people on the team and everything and whatnot. But it's like, I like how you said it's a slippery slope, because I'm convinced that if you create this situation, if you intended to, you could certainly ramp up the cult factor on this, get more people involved, and create a situation like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that I think another thing is, like, if you have kind of a hole in your soul that needs admiration from people, that would be very seductive to do, if you need that validation. The idea that, there could be more people who look to me and want to learn from me and stuff,
It's crazy, isn't it, that? It's like you've got that hole in your soul. Let's say you have 5 people who look to you for admiration. And it's like, this isn't enough. The problem is there's not enough people. That's the issue. How do you even make that conclusion? It's not like, rather than saying, what is it about me that needs this? It's more like, I'm fine. Yeah. I just need more of these people.
And it's unconscious, right? It's unconscious. I think for most people that would be unconscious. It's just like, this feels good. How do I get more of this? So there's one more lesson I want to pull out of this that I want to talk about. And it's the idea of post-truth. So it's been said that we live in a post-truth world where the idea is like, it doesn't matter anymore what's true, because something can be true. So let's say climate change is real. This can be true, but it doesn't matter, because you can be in a bubble of, social media and friends and so on, where it is considered a hoax. And the fact of the matter doesn't matter, right? Because the information landscape we live in is post-truth. Truth doesn't matter. So, and this I think is true and tragic. And mostly Mark Zuckerberg's fault. No, it's not true. It's not him alone. But he does have a lot to answer for. Social media has a lot to do with this. And I think it's true, but also I think it's nothing new. So the capacity for like post-truth is definitely in us, and I saw it in this organization too. And so a very interesting example of this is, again, remember there's us versus them, right? Every once in a while, someone will be like cast out of the organization. Eventually me too, by the way. But someone would maybe one of the instructors or something would do something. They basically break with the organization and they'd leave the organization. And what would happen is inevitably, right after that happens, the story would be, well, they were never really that good. I always knew there was something wrong with them. I always said that even if 2 weeks before you sang their praises, all of a sudden, no, I always knew they were never really one of us. And I knew it, right? So you're just blatantly rewriting history. And it's clearly there, right? And it's also one of those things because it's like a loyalty test. If 2 weeks ago I said, this guy's our best instructor, and then 2 weeks later I go, I always knew this guy sucked because he left the organization. If someone speaks up and says, hold on, aren't you contradicting yourself? It's like, you're not loyal, right? You're also an outsider.
How dare you question my authority?
Exactly. And in that sense, getting people to believe something that's patently false is also a further step of commitment, because you are doing something. You're making a greater commitment to this tribe. You're making a greater commitment to this cult by believing things that are blatantly wrong, that other people, that outsiders would just be like, no, this is clearly wrong. You're an idiot. You're making the sacrifice of being that person who's an idiot to outsiders, and that strengthens your bind into the cult further, right? And yeah, that's just another thing that I thought is really interesting to see. Because this was not done like strategically or consciously. That was just the impulse that they had, was to cast people out like that and rewrite history about those people. And again, most of this was just happening unconsciously. But once you know it, you'll start seeing it, and you start seeing like the manipulative power in it.
Well, yeah, it's one of these things that once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah,
it's like the fake guru stuff. We've talked about that a lot. And at one point, I wasn't privy to the tactics they used. Now I can't not see them.
Yeah. Which is kind of my final point and conclusion here, is that we have to realize that this can easily happen and that there's many forms of this. And there can be cases where really huge amounts of people fall into some kind of a cult. And I think it's a mistake to just think, well, they're all idiots or they're all malicious or something. And rather to understand the reality of this. So again, if we talk about something like QAnon, which seems to have loads of followers, the reality of this is that like people slip into this, and individuals, if you pull individuals to the side, many of them will be like, well, I'm not sure about some of this, So it's more complex than it seems. And just saying, well, they're all crazy is not very useful. But also to acknowledge that this is a solvable problem, because you can build awareness about this stuff, and you can create this mental self-defense where you see this happening. And you can also create in the community that you build yourself. So in your social circles, in your teams that you build, whatever, you can have a culture that counteracts culty, kind of the cult playbook. And an example of this comes from also my experience with martial arts. So I was cast out of this organization eventually because I was going against the grain too much. One of the things, like I at the time I didn't realize this, but I think this was the breaking point for them. I rejected their promotion to to one of the levels, right? They were like, you're ready for this level, we're promoting you. And I was like, no. And they fought really hard. They really tried to force this on me. And I was just like, listen, for me, this rank represents a skill level, and I don't have that skill level yet. And I'm not accepting this rank until I feel I'm ready for it. And they absolutely hated this. And of course, this is completely sacrilegious, because what I'm saying is, all the other guys who have this rank suck. That's not what I meant to say, but that's what I was saying. I was saying your standard for this rank is lower than my standard for this rank. And therefore, some of the people in the organization who have this rank don't deserve it. That's what they heard, right? And this was like I had many little conflicts before this, but this was the big conflict where they were like, yeah, they were basically losing their minds about this. And I was training outside of the school. I was training with my own friends, and they got wind of that and they didn't like that either. And eventually it was just too much. And I was the black sheep and I was cast out. And I'm sure they said all kinds of bad things about me afterwards. Oh, he was never good.
Yeah, of course.
We knew that he sucked. Anyway.
we knew all along. We were just waiting for the moment.
Yeah.
This was a test.
For 10 years.
Yeah, we were waiting for 10 years to kick him out. Yeah,
anyway.
Seems likely.
So I was cast out, but I was training with my own friends. And I tried to, this was my first experimentation with building a certain culture, and my first success in inoculating a culture against one of the cult problems. So one of the cult problems is you can't question authority. And so often, and this, look, all I cared about at the time is martial arts. And so for me, the reason I didn't like this is because it makes your martial arts worse. If you can't question, why are we doing this technique this way? Then, if you can't ask questions about it, if you can't challenge what someone's telling you, then that limits your potential growth and learning. And that bugged me. And so in the group of friends I trained with, I was the guy with the most experience there, so I was often in a teaching role there. And we made it a rule, and we reinforced this rule, is that you can always question what you're being told. Okay? You can always question it. If I'm showing you a technique and you think, okay, you're defending yourself like this, but what if I kick you, or what if I punch you differently or something? You can always ask that. That's always a legit question. And I want you to hold me to the standard. Like, I have to have a good answer. I can't just tell you, just do it because I said so,
Mm-hmm.
So I want you to challenge me. I want us to challenge each other. And I want us to have a culture where you can always question the person above you in authority, let's say, or in expertise.
Yeah.
And this was successful. In my training group, this became part of the norm. This became just a norm that you are always allowed to question and challenge, and you will get questioned and challenged if you're teaching.
So
And
that's one of the culture things
yes.
that you can implement.
And so with that, and to me, that's one of the solutions, right? That was like my pilot project. You can inoculate a culture against these problems. Because if that's one of the rules in your culture, it's much harder for someone to maneuver themselves into a you can't question me guru position. And it's much harder for someone to go, ooh, drink this magic water. Because you have a culture, people have the instinct, the reflex of going, hold on, isn't that bullshit?
Yeah. It's like almost holding truth is like higher in like the hierarchy. Truth is above anyone.
Right.
You know? So even the figurehead of any organization, like truth is more important, as a value than anything he says. It's like, and no one can maneuver the way out of being questioned, because obviously if you're saying that truth is the most important thing here, try and create a cult out of people who are deep down committed to the truth and finding it and expressing it and stuff. It's like, okay, I no longer have putty in my hands to work with.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and to me, that is like, look, I thought this was an interesting story to talk about. I hope that this was interesting and fun to listen to, but also in a practical sense for me, the big takeaway from this is that you can create this kind of, like, you can teach people or you can create that culture in your social circle. You can do that with your family, with your kids, and so on. You can create like these habits and these norms that inoculate people against falling into a cult. And I think that's one of the things that we should do, that we should be invested in doing, especially if you're interacting with children in any capacity, whether, as a teacher, as a coach, as a parent, whatever. I think that's one of the things that is worth doing, is to think about, okay, I realized that everybody is vulnerable to culty stuff and conspiracy stuff. And now that you've listened to this, you understand some of the mechanisms of how it happens. And you can realize that you can inoculate people against this. And this is one of those things, like the bottom line is, I'm trying to make the world a better place somehow, right? And this is one of those things that I just think that if the more people do this, the more people have this kind of mental self-defense, the better the world will be overall. Okay, this is the bit where we talk about something random.
Okay, what's the random thing you've got for us today?
So the random thing I have to check my notes here. So I listened to the Tim Ferriss podcast, the episode with Richard Schwartz, which is called IFS, Psychedelic Experiences Without Drugs and Finding Inner Peace for Our Many Parts. Episode number 492. This was really interesting episode. So do you know about internal family systems, IFS?
I know vaguely what the premise is. I've never done any parts work, any IFS stuff. The men's emotional support group that I'm part of, two of the guys there have IFS therapists. Because the guy that runs the call said that this modality has some real power to it.
Yeah.
But he's not trained in it himself. So he just sort of said, go find a legit IFS practitioner and it will work. One of the guys has been doing it for a year, and the change in him that I've observed is it's real.
Nice. Yeah, so this episode was the first I'd ever heard of it. And as a very, very brief summary of what internal family systems is like it tries to basically you try to meet the different parts of you. And it's almost like you try to personify different parts of you. So it's in a way like, let's say you have some kind of behavior where you get outbursts of anger. You try to meet that angry part of you and almost like, who is that? And then you try to have like a conversation with that person, and you try to, so over the course of this therapy, it's like you pull out these different parts of yourself, and then it's almost like you have this family of parts of you, and you're trying to resolve the family conflicts. That would be like the super brief version of how this works.
Yeah, I think a lot of this, like IFS, the basic premise of it, I think I've found aspects of this in a bunch of different places. It's like one of my favorite spiritual teachers, Ramdas, talked about this, about how your various neuroses are like, they're like kids in a family photo. It's like it's like include them all, but they're not really going to go anywhere, or they might. It's up to them pretty much. But yeah, I've had experience with this almost on an intuitive kind of level. It's having a dialogue with different parts of you. I actually spoke to Gia the other day about this, because she mentioned IFS, and I said that at one point I kind of did this almost by accident. So there was a time when I was working for someone, I had a boss who was just a bit of a dick, and he seemed to just enjoy the power he had over me. And there was one particular day where he was just a bit more of an asshole than normal. And I would just sort of be people pleasing and be like, oh, okay, no problem. And then just sort of take it on the chin. And I was sort of engulfed in a kind of rage, like an internally directed rage. And I was having like thoughts of physically attacking him. And I was like, oh boy, what's this about? So I wrote about this, and I gave a voice to this part of me. And the reason why I had confidence and courage to do that is because I defined it as a part of me, not who I was. So I just wrote about it, and it was just crazy shit that I wrote down. But I also went one step further, and I took out my ink, like I used to paint like Zen brushwork. So I got a brush, black ink, and I painted what this thing was. And it was quite frightening how that's how it felt. So this thing had giant fucking teeth, and it had bright white eyes, and it was just screaming, and it wanted blood and chaos, and it wanted to inflict pain and damage, and it didn't care. It wasn't compassionate. It didn't give a flying fuck about anything else. It just wanted pure destruction and terror and all the bad shit. And I painted it, and I was like, wow, whoa, okay, that's totally a part of me. Like, that's definitely a part of me. And from doing that, I kind of recognized that what I did was this thing also was trying to serve me.
Yeah.
In a way. It was in its own voice. It was basically saying, how dare you let this asshole have power over you? Never fucking do that again. Don't you dare let him do that again, kind of thing. It's like repressing my assertiveness meant that this thing had to posture far more than would be healthy to get me to pay attention to it, basically. So I did that. But in the process of doing that, I also painted the hero. Because after that, I did this same thing the following day, and I kind of impressed myself at how well I painted this thing, because I'm not a particularly good painter. But I was just like, whatever. And it was like a knight who had shoulder pads, and it's just the silhouette of a knight who has like a sword, and for some reason is holding this orb. I don't know what the orb is in his hand. And it's just the hero. And it's almost like, wow, I painted two archetypal parts of me. And I looked at the hero and I was like, okay, yeah, that's a part of me too. There's a part of me that's got a sword, meaning he's not harmless. And he also has an orb that seemed like it illuminates darkness. As in, like, it makes the unconscious conscious, or just lights the dark places. And it also has armor. And he also is not in a aggressive posture. It's more like an honorable sort of posture, like he's humble. I was like, yeah, that's a part of me too. So I guess in an unconscious way, I kind of did IFS, or did some parts work. So that's that kind of my limited experience with the premise.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I do think that lines up with that kind of idea. Yeah, you're trying to meet these different parts of you, and you're trying to make them more visible to yourself. And I do think there is an intuitive way in which we can think, okay, it does make sense that it's like you are different people at different times and in different contexts. You know, your evening self and your morning self, when the alarm goes off, often have disagreements with each other, right? About the priorities of the day.
Yeah.
And similarly, like, you know, your hungry self, your horny self, your angry self, they're all different. Sometimes very different.
They have different motivations. Yeah. They have different ways of achieving their goals. The subjective experience of being these different things is fundamentally different.
Exactly. And so I thought it's really interesting that there's a framework that really goes deep into this. And I listened to this episode, which I recommend, and we should link to that too. Really recommend listening to this episode. And what I basically just did, I listened to this and I thought, well, this is really interesting. And I simply tried to replicate what they were talking about in this episode, in writing mainly. And it was really impressive. It was really impressive mainly because, and I say this, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this, is like I'm usually a non-responder or very weak responder to things. So, and that seems to be a general rule. So to all kinds of things, you know, if someone goes, "Ooh, I did this meditation and it was just amazing and my whole body was buzzing and so on," almost guaranteed if I do the same thing, nothing happens. Or even medication, you know, painkillers. I can take painkillers, basically nothing happens and my pain level doesn't change, you know. And it really is very widely true. It's also, for example, coffee. You know, I drink coffee. I can't tell the difference in my reaction between caffeinated and decaffeinated coffee. It feels the same. So in general, I'm quite used to trying things and nothing happens. And with this, I tried this out and it really felt like something was happening here that was different, you know? It felt like this is different from a usual writing session because I'm following this system. And yeah, it was just really interesting, really worthwhile. And I basically just wanted to highlight that to tell people, hey, go do that.
What did this writing session entail?
So in writing, I tried to, I tried to replicate it. They basically go through they give a demonstration of what a therapy session, an IFS session would look like. And I tried to replicate that. And so I tried to think about, like, who are these parts of me? And I tried in writing to basically to ask them, to almost have a dialogue with them. And the most fascinating thing that happened for me was that some memories came up that I hadn't thought of in ages. And that really suggested to me like something is happening here where somehow the process of identifying and personifying a part of me and kind of asking it a question and waiting for an answer made a memory appear that if you had asked me about this, I couldn't have recalled. It was in this specific context, some ancient memory came up, you know? To me, that was the most amazing thing where I was like, oh, okay, something's happening here, you know?
Yeah. All right. Well, that makes sense. I mean, were you is there like a written sort of step-by-step for this that we could link to, or?
No, I would just link to the podcast episode because, you know, you can try to wing it. Like I've done stuff like this quite a lot, so I felt like I can just give this a try. But they also recommend like books and courses and stuff. So I think anyone can listen to this and decide, do I want to just give this a shot, or do I want to contact the therapist, or do I want to read one of these books? I basically just wanted to mention this because I think it seems to me that it's worthwhile to pursue, and this is something I want to explore more of as well.
Cool. Yeah, I think I'll join you on that.
Nice. All right, so link to that in the show notes as usual. All right, with that, thank you for listening. First time I've talked about my experience with cults. I hope you found that entertaining. You can look at the episode description to get the link to the show notes. And you can go to icario.com, that's Icario with a K.com, to get all our stuff, read our blog posts, buy our things if we're selling anything at the time. And you can, what didn't I say? Oh, you can go to anchor.fm/Icario to leave us a voice message.
What Shane meant to say was, join us.
You can sign up to the inner circle for only $15,000 a month.
You're just on the precipice.
Yeah.
Just by listening to this podcast, you know, you're getting there, but you're not quite there yet. You're almost there. You could be.
Like once you really commit with your wallet, then everything will be better.
By the way, we're all aliens trapped in human bodies.
No, don't tell them that yet.
Oh shit! Want to get on the inner circle.
All right. See you guys next time.
See you next time, guys. Take care.